for discussion and questions and answers immediately after each discussion or each presentation. So I and my colleagues and friends, Sarah Chessel and Deborah Parks, are up first. So we are going to attempt to present in hybrid form. So they're virtually out there somewhere and they're on our screens. And my name is Sarah Bates Evoy, and we're going to present together. So our presentation is entitled Reflections from a Shut Up and Write Group, Building Connection, Confidence and Community Through Shared Academic Practice. And I suppose just to start with, what do we mean by a Shut Up and Write group? So this is, in the way that we're using it, it's an online space where people come together for a designated time on a designated day to write together. We don't actually write together, as in we're not creating papers together, but we come to a space where we write individually and have community as we do that. So during our presentation, we're going to cover the following: the origins of the group, where it came from, why we joined, the structure and what worked for us in our Shut Up and Write group, leadership and success factors, the benefits of being part of the group, the deepening of the experience, the evolving purpose of the group, the challenges and reflections that we have, to number but a few that we wanted to share, and looking forward, so what next, and then reflections and questions. But on the last slide, we will have our 3 email addresses up there. So if you have any questions or any comments that you don't get to say, but you would like to send to us, please do. And if we can support you in the future around setting up a Shut Up and Write group, please reach out. So I'm going to hand you over now to Sarah. Oh no, I'm not. I'm going to hand you over to myself. So the origins of our group. So myself and Sarah Chessel and Deborah Parks, and you can see their lovely faces there. We met at the IACR conference last year. But we became part of an emerging female writers group over the year, which was led out by Catherine Hastings, Caroline Kuhn, and Karen Zotzman. And as part of that group, everybody was focusing on their own writing, and they were learning skills through the wonderful kind of wisdom that was being passed on to us and through discussions that we were having as part of that group. And one of the suggestions was that if people were seeking community, that they would set up their own Shut Up and Write groups where they could meet at times and on days that suited them, and where they could continue that kind of supportive community space. So that's where this particular Shut Up and Write group came from. And it was ways to support the writing process and to set up our own groups. So there were a few of us within that larger group that kind of sent out kind of invitation emails saying, you know, in our case, it was myself, and I said, Friday afternoon works for me from 2 to 5, who's free and who would like to meet in that space where we can support each other to do our writing. And here we are a year later talking about that experience. Now I will hand over to Sarah Chessel.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I'm so sorry that I'm not with you guys in person in Poland. It looks like you're having an amazing time, and certainly the lectures are phenomenal. So just coming back to our Shut Up and Write group, considering why we joined this group. So people joined the group because there was a feeling of need to combat isolation, of folk working on their own with limited interactions and really seeking to increase connectivity. Building on that connectivity perspective, looking at the 3rd point on the slide about connection, in joining, our connection with others, we had a natural focus on critical realism approaches, which you would expect, as Sarah B's already outlined. But it was recognised that that connection was way wider. It was about research processes as well. And of course, it was about writing in itself. With the Shut Up and Write group being part of the Female Emerging Writers group, we had that common goal, we had that common need to meet deadlines for writing our papers, so there was that connectivity there. And this really provided accountability and the structure of our Shut Up and Write groups, allowing us to have that focused, consistent writing time, which was the very purpose of why we were actually meeting. May I have the next slide, please, Sarah? Thank you. So just thinking about structure and what worked. So considering the structure, simply put, consistency was really important to make things work. So Sarah B has talked about that we had weekly meetings on a Friday afternoon, and we as individuals committed to that meeting. So the same time each week, that consistency of meeting. And there was an invitation on Zoom that meant that anyone could start the meeting. So it wasn't owned by one person. It was open for anyone that was part of the group to open it, to start it. Structure went further than that as well. And if you Google Shut Up and Write, there's some really helpful key points on the process, the outline of what to do. And one of those key things is check-ins and check-outs, and these enabled structure. So there was a check-in was a natural flow. You expect to welcome someone, say hi, say how's your week been? You're connecting, you're getting to understand how that person is feeling on that set period. But there's a focus specifically on the reason why we're in the Shut Up and Write groups. So for example, tackling we would talk about what we're going to write in the session, and that could be tackling a discussion section. So, you know, really getting your head into a piece that you're trying to write that is a knotty problem, or referencing, or for example, data analysis, but checking in and saying, this is what I'm going to focus on in the time. And naturally checking out as well. So really, an unsaid thing was almost holding one another to account, yourself to account, and asking, what have folk done? How had their writing gone during that period of time? What had they got? What had they resolved? What did they actually tackled? Some of the structure and what worked well was also to have a small, consistent group. So that's that thing about building up familiarity, that trust over time. And we went from the politeness to sharing queries. And at times those could be concerns. So how do I interpret, for example, collective agency? And that would have been one of the questions I would have been asking. With familiarity comes trust. And what was lovely was there was a bit of a rhythm with that trust. And we would quite often sign off saying happy writing. I think it was started by Sarah B. So it was a common sign off, as in our Shut Up and Write groups, we checked in. We would say happy writing or something similar. Cameras were turned off, microphones were turned off. So we muted the microphones, and I used the Pomodoro technique. So I'd switch on the app and I'd say, right, 45 minutes of focused time now, knowing that my fellow members of the Shut Up and Write group were there on the screen and we were doing the same thing. Next slide, please. Thank you, Sarah. Just pausing for a second to offer a quote by way of considering about feelings of connectivity, and a bridge to join the next slide that I will talk to in just a second. And the quote by Carl is, "They may forget what you said, but they will never forget how you made them feel." And that feeling of trust, that feeling of connectivity, that feeling of being part of something, I really don't think can be underestimated. I'll leave you to reflect yourselves about what that might mean for you. Next slide, please. Thanks, Sarah. So just looking at leadership and success factors and considering the factors for success, there are a number of points that we've got here on the slide. So within the Shut Up and Write group, we had this unsaid chair. It was an unappointed chair. It was a person that chaired setting up the group and making sure everything was running smoothly. And it's really interesting because I reflected on the fact that actually the chair is so important, providing natural leadership, which is effortless. And as a group, we agreed that, you know, these points that I'm saying to you. So natural leadership that's effortless means that it's respectful, it's inclusive, it supports the flow of discussion, but incredibly with that natural leadership, it also provides that opportunity for pauses, those pauses where you might start to feel slightly uncomfortable, but gives the chance for a person to feel that they've got a chance to think, to be able to provide that moment for personal reflection and consideration, rather than always rushing through and not giving people a chance. And that natural leadership you don't always get, so it cannot be underestimated. So huge thanks to our chair. Within the established structures, the check-in and check-out, as I've said, was really, really successful. Flexibility is noted as being really important and supportive. So thinking about an individual's needs. So in response to a question or a point, naturally flexing to enable a deep dive into something that is possibly challenging a member of the Shut Up and Write group, but being able to allow the individual to explore that and members to be able to provide input and support. And that flexing naturally happens. That can't be prescriptive, just happens. But ultimately, it was felt that the key success to our group was actually the maturity of its members, the approaches of members, the respect and the trust that was built over time, which is really appreciated and continues to be appreciated. And it's next slide, and I'm handing the baton over to Deborah. Deborah.
Thanks so much, Sarah's. And thank you everybody for being here. And I too wish I were there in person, but I'm not, but this is second best. So key benefits of the group. So one was the reduced imposter syndrome. And one of us put it, that at times she would doubt whether she knows enough. But that being in the group, that she really feels that we're in it all together and we're all questioning and we're all growing together. Increased productivity, so the time is allocated and a rhythm develops. At a point where a deadline was coming up, 2 additional meeting days were added for that week, so that also helped to increase productivity. Emotional support and validation. Okay, I think these were referred to already, but these were just as important as the structure that was created by having the time put aside, right? And that showing of caring included hearing about what each person was up to in their personal lives. And one of us said that what comes through for her in the group is the, quote, humanistic side of people. So there is that trust. Next slide, please. Deepening the experience. So the small group size allowed for meaningful dialogue. Dialogue could be about the writing process, about trying to figure out the place of critical realism in one's writing, or about the academic journey. Knowledge of each other's research enhanced accountability. And we had a sense of where each other was at. I mean, we told each other, where we were and whether we were stuck. And we could ask each other about that, both in terms of the check-ins, what had been going on for us over the past week, and the check-outs. How had it worked for us during the writing period that day? Encouragement and learning through shared challenges. And I can speak for myself personally. I know hearing about each other's challenges and trying to complete a PhD, which is where I am at, and realizing that they got through it was reassuring. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Evolving purpose. So yes, initially the group was formed to write journal articles. That was true for most people. In my case, actually, I was not writing a journal article, and I was grateful to be able to be in this as I was working on my dissertation. It transitioned to an ongoing support space. So even after members had done what they needed on the articles they were working on, they wanted to continue using the space as a carved out time to write and reflect and to check in with each other. And checking in, I should note, even on days that people could not for some reason actually devote the full 3 hours to writing that day, it was still important for members that they check in with each other and that they check out. And the desire to continue beyond the original goal, well, I will say that so far there's no talk of this group stopping. And next slide, please. So challenges and reflections. So the loss of some members without closure. We'd started off with a 5 people. We ended up with at present we're 3 ongoing. And so the members who left had certainly expressed that they had appreciated the group and they had benefited from being part of it. And they, for whatever reason, did not have the same need to continue, or scheduling issues had come up for them. And it was just that for the rest of us, it was kind of, in some ways, not unanticipated, I suppose. And it was just that sense of missing them afterward. And I guess that really speaks to how much each of us mattered to each other. And reflections on how group dynamics shaped the success. Well, all 3 of us agree that it was not merely just having a group or space to meet, but that we were meeting with people we had developed relationships with. Our overlapping interests and concerns and our curiosity about each other and the mutual respect for each other were all part of it. And also the fact that there's no official time in the working week allocated to writing and thinking about writing was especially true for 2 members of the group. Yeah, and this meeting time and the space was for them a way of combating this limitation and of carving out that needed space. Thank you very much. And now handing it over again to Sarah.
Thanks, Deborah. Sarah C., do you want to say anything else in relation to that last point?
Yeah, thank you. I do. So it's one of the points in particular I was raising. It's, a reflection on the challenges is I work full time. I work a 50-hour week in the NHS, National Health Service in England, and it's really tough not having official time in the working week, as Deborah's outlined. But it's really interesting to actually just reflect on how this group has provided, as Deborah said, this carved out dedicated space. But it's also a reflection on the fact that we hold ourselves accountable for our own writing inactions. So if we don't manage to write anything, or actions. So it's an important lens that we can focus on and reflect on where we are personally within our writing approaches and experiences. And for me, that's been absolutely invaluable. Fantastic. Over to you, Sarah B. Thank you.
So looking forward, we have a new member that's joining us in the next week or two. And we reflected on that even before that new member looked to join. And we thought, like, if new people wanted to come in, we would like to formalize our group agreements. So we've formed a way of going on. We have expectations of what's going to happen during our group and how we're going to be. And now we have an opportunity to formalize that, not as rules, but as agreements, and to set out our expectations and to find out what that new member will expect and whether we'll be able to meet those expectations. And we think it's really important to name that, including if somebody for whatever reason and for very good reasons can no longer commit to the group, that it's verbalized and we get to say goodbye. Because we've learned that from kind of missing people and then wondering how they are, so that we'll have a way of leaving the group or stepping out of the group, with the option to always step back in. We wanted to share this model with the wider academic community. There's nothing new about this model. It happens in lots of spaces and it happens in lots of different ways. But as people who were on our PhD journeys, we were lonely and we sought out groups, and this is a very easy way to have an ongoing community. And I encourage you now, you're all in those spaces, whether you're a student or whether you're an academic. It can be quite lonely to be in critical realism, to be in your own research area, and it's such a solo activity writing that this online space, even when the cameras are off, you're with other people. It can help combat that. So we're sharing the good news. It's not that hard to get community, and then to continue fostering inclusive and collaborative spaces within our own lives and within our own work. And for me in particular, I have tried this in several spaces, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I would be hoping as I now move into supervising that I will be supporting people to set these up for themselves. So this is how happy we look on a Friday afternoon. We just love it. So we really just wanted to thank, I suppose, the former and the current members of the group and future members, and a big thank you to Catherine and Karen and Caroline for setting up the Female Emerging Writings group, of which this particular Shut Up and Write group came from. And we have 4 minutes for questions or reflections, but if you want support or if you have any questions, please reach out to any one of the 3 of us. So, any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. That was lovely. I feel like I'm basking in the warmth and support that the 3 of you show for each other, and it's just kind of emerging, and I feel like, yes, I'm wallowing it. So thank you. I've got 2 questions, if I may. The first is, I wonder if you could just talk about the female aspect of the female writers group and sort of what the thinking and the sort of implications are around that. And the other question is whether having a writing group where you meet once a week also helps you writing outside of that time and space.
I might take that first one, as I probably didn't go into enough detail on the origins. But the female writing group, I'm speaking from my own perspective of what I felt happened, was there were women at last year's conference who were new or knew enough to critical realism, and confidence wasn't very high. And that was identified by some of the other more experienced women who were willing to give of their time and their wisdom and offer to create a space where they would help us to write, and in particular talk about publication. And yeah, so it was very empowering. Yeah. Would anybody, do you want to repeat your second question?
Knock-on effect, sorry, knock-on effect during the rest of the week in terms of your writing from having this once a week writing session.
Deborah, you might want to talk to that. Was there a knock on
and
the
I'm
rest of the
happy
week?
to as well when Deborah's finished.
Yeah, well, I would just say that I'm not sure how much it was an effect on the other days. What I will say is I was so grateful for that one space. I had put it aside and I told people I am not available this time. I knew it. There were no exceptions. And it's funny, like tomorrow, because the other 2 members are going to be tied up at the conference, I will still stick to that schedule. I might even sign on knowing that there's nobody else signed on. But it was just so I suppose the one thing it does is that it makes me know at the end of the week that whatever I could or couldn't get done previously, I got those 3 hours that day.
Sarah C.
Thank you. It's a great question, and if I am really honest, joining the Female Emerging Writers group was the best thing I ever did. I was in the wonder years with my PhD. I'm still working on my PhD, but it's taken my writing from here to here. So there's a legitimacy of you're checking in and you're speaking to fellow members of the group. You're building that trust, but with it comes perhaps this level of really being able to focus on your writing and looking at, actually, I'm going to do this for this period of time. Now, for me, working full time in the National Health Service, Friday afternoon, I'm at my most tired, and I tend to be studying evenings and into the weekend. So you'd think Friday afternoon, shut up and write, but actually it focused the mind. I can switch off from my work life. I can really focus on my studies. And if I'm then studying at all weekend, I've actually said, this is what I'm going to focus on. So I felt that I was able to be more responsive and I was holding myself more to account. I use past tense, it's still the current tense. But it was just so valuable. Can I answer just very quickly on the first question as well? For me and Warwick last year was amazing. And when there was the opportunity, because I presented last year at Warwick, when there was the opportunity to be part of this Female Emerging Writers group, I thought, why do we need this? Why do we need this? Why can't it just be a writing group? And what I hadn't realized was actually that commonality of voice, the ability to actually be able to, we shouldn't use tribes, I know, but to be with other women, to be able to write and actually get that recognition of, you know, I'm a mum to 2 adult children, juggling work life, trying to do my PhD, my aspirations. And actually it all just came together for me. So it's been really empowering and really positive. I hope that answers your questions.
Alicia, I know you have a question, but I'm sorry because we're into the next speaker's time. I'm so sorry, but if you could please put it in the chat or email one of us, we'd love to respond. So Lisa.
Set a timer too. So thank you. My name's Lisa, and I want to talk about a critical realist narrative inquiry. Now, this came about during my doctorate. I was questioned during my confirmation of candidature as to whether the critical realist philosophy worked with the narrative inquiry methodology. And it was something I took to the conference in the Philippines. And luckily, I got to spend some time with Doug after, who said, you know, he does narrative inquiries all the time. And why don't I just invent the paradigm? I took that literally, well, I said no, and then I said yes. But in my doctorate, it was rejected because it's never been used before. However, I've finished my doctorate. So I thought I'd introduce this because it was something, I should start that sent me into a spin, you know, so I wanted to know a little bit more about what was going on. And was I on the right track? So what I thought we'd talk about was, you know, the research problem. And then I've just walked the Camino, so I thought I'd use that as my narrative example. Go through a concept map, how I applied the critical realism with the narrative inquiry, because I like stratified ontology, and I know people don't like that as a form of analysis, but I'll talk you through it. A framework, scope, yeah, see how we go with time. Next. All right. So my research problem, I was looking at adult education and looking at Australian systems with, you know, higher education, vocational education and workplace as being separated in purpose, policy and funding. So the arguments in the literature was really supporting that aligned education system. But there was a lacking of understanding of needs, adult learning needs in our contemporary society when we're looking at change in work. So my aim was to understand and then explain the needs of adult learners in today's society. So the explanatory power of critical realism with the experiential sort of understanding of the narrative inquiry was what attracted me to this sort of framework. And I felt when I learnt, I still consider myself quite a naive researcher, but when I looked into the critical realism, it had enough philosophical grounding to be worthy to produce this coherent sort of approach to explore meaning and agency and structure. I might just move on. All right, so my Camino story. I want you to put on your critical realist hats. All right, on the second night of the Camino, so I'd spent 48 hours getting to St. Jean Pied de Port, and I went out, had dinner, and may or may not have had some gluten, which doesn't agree with me. So the first day on the Camino is up, basically. It's only 9 kilometers, but it's going up. Once I got there, I felt great. That night, I got really sick. When I got sick, I was so scared. I was in this room by myself. I questioned my capacity as an old lady doing this stupid 800-kilometer trek, my judgment, and all the questions that come into play. Was I strong enough? Can I really do this? So when we look at that through the critical realist lens, we can see that reality exists beyond our experience of it. So, the Camino is something that people have been doing for 2,000 years. The terrain, my body's limits, they're all real. But so was my fear. My fear was valid, but maybe it was only partially valid. Maybe there are other mechanisms at play. And the critical realism, I was able to separate what is from to what is form and what is perceived. So what my mind was going through, how my body was feeling, probably was just going to be a moment in time. It wasn't going to be forever. That's my shadow too, by the way. All right, so the deeper structures, physically, I was exhausted. I'd spent 2 days traveling. I got sick and it was tough going. I walk on the beach in Australia. I don't climb mountains, let alone with, an 8.5 kilogram pack. I was traveling alone. So socially, I was on my own. It was unfamiliar. The language was strange. The food was different. I was feeling quite vulnerable. The psychology, my fear of failure may have come into it, my self-doubt. And then there's the existential. Why does somebody walk the Camino in the first place? Is it that longing for meaning, that inner transformation? It's a pilgrimage. People walk it for a pilgrimage. So there's always, in my mind, there's deeper structures going on than what we can see. Maybe. So if we look at the retroduction and the emergence, moving from crisis to the turning point. So what had to be true for this to occur? I was an old lady in a strange place doing a silly thing, but I was stronger than what I thought I was. The emergence was my strength and understanding that my body could be pushed to limits that I didn't think it could go through. I also learnt more about the Camino because I went into it excited, but not really understanding what you had to do every day, So that clarity and that resilience took shape. The night that I was ill didn't define me as a failure, but it sparked something. And that's from a critical realist perspective, it helps us honor the seen and the unseen in our stories. And that's what I wanted to capture with adult learners in today's contemporary society. What are their needs? What can we see as their needs? Because as a teacher, working, in a higher education system, I think I understand what the learners need. But if I haven't asked them the question, I don't know what's going on in their lives. I don't know what their goals are. How would I know what they need? And at the time, so I was an adult learner in working as a teacher in an adult education situation. And my 2 daughters were both at uni as well. So I was quite surrounded by adult learning. It was really my world at the time, still is. So my concept map, when we marrying the critical realism and the narrative inquiry, you know, the individual comes to know in unique ways, knowing it's complicated by multiple levels of reality, and reality is intransitive, but our knowledge is transitive. The narrative inquiry helps, gives us the knowledge of what is real, and we know that this cannot be understood independent of the social actors. As a teacher, I can't understand the needs of the adult learner without asking the adult learner. So the adult learner's story must be told from their perspective. Applying this study, where I wanted to explain, so I needed to understand it and then explain the causal mechanisms and the effects that revealed the adult learner's stories. It's a layered approach in the analysis of the needs from the experiential, inferential, and dispositional. So I took this from Wiltshire and Roniken's work, where they align with the actual, the real, and the experienced, with a little twist, yeah, because it's critical realism. Sorry? Oh, the other direction? Your direction. Oh, okay, I got it. Thank you. All right, so I've thought about marrying the critical realism and the narrative inquiry, and looking at how they work. So if you start at the little purple man, it goes around. So the green ones are the critical realist points, and the pink are the narrative inquiry points that sort of work together. I had to move closer so I can read it. All right, so we talk about epistemic relativism, ontological realism, judgment rationality. It moves on like the oh, you can see it. So it's dependent on time. Narrative inquiry is beginning, middle, and end if we're talking about a narrative. And it just goes, and it's just that past, present, future. And I've just tried to marry it up so it made some sense for me when I was designing this work. There are problems, you know, in that it lacks predictive power, observations fallible, the reflexivity impact on learner sharing, but in some ways that reflexivity empowered that learner sharing too, because the relationship of trust was built and developed. Okay. This is my version of the stratified ontology. So we can see Uluru from the empirical level, what it looks like. We know that it's a rock in the middle of the desert in the middle of Australia. This has sort of come from Wiltshire and Ronkins, but also another lady, but I've forgotten her name, Canadian. The knowledge of what is perceived to be happening. So we've got the perspective. The second picture is the actual, the knowledge of what actually happens It's from a picture, from a perspective, we can't see the whole rock, the crevices and the whole story to this rock. And then the knowledge of what and why things are, the mechanisms, networks, values, and institutions. So to me, the idea of this was, there's hidden but necessary preconditions for the actual and the empirical evidence. There's more to Uluru than what we know. If we're looking for examples, we'll be looking at the experience. What does it look like? What does it feel like when you're there? Wiltshire and Ronican explain this as experiential. So the evidence that you collect at this level is intentions, hopes, dreams, concerns, feelings, and beliefs. From the actual, we have the experiences and events. So sometimes we can't see all that's going on. They used this sort of data, and I'll explain this in another way a little bit later, as the inferred meaning. So we've got the stories from our adults, and then what's the inferred meaning that we get from, them telling me how they got into adult learning, what it was like for them, what were their struggles, and what they needed. So the inferred meaning for what might be occurring in the world beyond the participants and redescribe the concepts into more abstract terms. I found that my participants, if I let them talk, they worked that out themselves. They could go a little bit deeper into their story and say, that first year at uni was really, really difficult. But once I found out how I best learn, or how to write an assignment, then they were once they knew themselves, they could move forward. And then the dispositional is the theorize about the properties that must exist to produce this empirical I've gone too far. Data. All right. So finally, the research steps. So used narrative chunking, and then chunked down the narratives into themes, but still used narrative codes. So identify the regularities, which became our central themes. The core narratives were reduced into core themes, then reduced the core narrative themes into ontologically informed grand themes, and then using an abduction to develop the key experiential, influential, and dispositional findings. And from this, you reversed the order and it became an explanatory sentence, because of the existence of the dispositional sort of data, there was a tendency for the inferential, and then that manifested in our data as A, B, C, and D, what part of the story. And because it was a narrative that I was embedded in, I wrote a narrative presentation of results. And I think my time's just about up, so we might leave it there. There are some limitations, diversity, and that both are emerging. But the whole idea of the critical realism underlabouring, I found really handy to work with the narrative structure. Thank you. I like the hands, thanks.
Any questions online? We'll take a question from the room.
Hey, Lisa. Just a question of clarification. When you did your interviews, did you do narrative style interviews, or it sounded like you made a choice to treat them in a narrative way at a later point.
Yeah, I did semi-structured interviews,
Yeah, okay.
but they were really semi-structured. Like there were a few questions to orientate them.
Yeah.
The plan was to do a follow-up interview. Some people wanted to do the follow-up. Some people said, I've told you everything, you know. So it was, yeah. So the semi-structured interviews, yeah, where they told me their story, their learning story.
Cool. Yeah, it's something in the narrative interviewing where it can be very, very much about description and understanding. I think it is really nice to think about it as a way that we can, get more evidence for thinking, yes, but why is it described like that? So I also, like with Doug, I don't see any issue with compatibility. It's really about how, like any other tool, how you use it and recognizing the nature of the tool and maybe where some of the inconsistencies are, as you did, and making compensations for that or making adjustments for that. But nice to hear about the work. Thank you.
Yeah, one lady even wrote a poem at the end, and you know, so I've got that as evidence too, which was really cool, you know. So, and I think that allows people to be individual, and so you can get their individual journey. Yeah, very cool.
Any other questions? Thank you, Lisa. Okay, Leslie, we now have you.
Yes. Thank you. Welcome for everybody. Just a moment. Yes, welcome everybody. Could be seen my presentation? Well, thank you. My name is Leszek Korporowicz. I'm sociologist of culture. I worked at Warsaw University many years, later at Jagiellonian University in Kraków, and now at University Kardynał Wyszyński in Warsaw. And my way to critical reality is from philosophy and sociology of culture and reflection about system of values and axiology of contemporary culture, challenges of modern time, especially inside humanities and social and human sciences. What I'd like to present today is a subject entitled Culture Dignity as a missing category in understanding modern human reality. The notion culture dignity is of course not precise. It's very maybe metaphorical, like many notions in humanities. But I believe that it has a sense and it has a real destination and real sense in real reality. But this notion is often reduced to many simpler behavioral and even simplistic categories. That's why it should be revitalized and used in much more creative way in contemporary humanities, not only in sociology, but also in social anthropology. I try to next that. There are a lot of macrostructural reasons and factors, maybe civilizational reasons of reductionism in culture, reality perception, how we understand reality, and in real reality in human sciences. I divided those factors for three parts. Functional, where culture is unfortunately reduced to a system of behaviors or artifacts of social structure. From this point of view, culture is very passive, is only component, is not independent power or creative potential. It's only aspect, only function of the social structure. Unfortunately, such kind of understanding of cultures is characterized for many sociological approach to culture. I'm sociologist. That's why I understand such kind of reductionism and communication as an example of functional reductionism. Communication understood not as a kind of interaction, but as a process of transmission, process of influencing, one-way process, not indirective process. And a lot of consequences of such understanding and such feeling and such social practice reduces our understanding of culturality. The next kind of reductionism is ontological. Reality is very often understood as only subjective images or mental constructs of reality. And the question of many philosophers and sociologists that what reality is, it's only your imagination, because we don't know what reality is. That's why our assumption should be that it is a kind of assumption. And what is especially important for critical realism and for humanities today is human person reduced to individual being, to singular individuals. It's not the same, of course, because human person means much more than divided individual existence of particular human beings. And truth only artifacts of methods, because we can say what the truth is only by our methods. That's a kind of reductionism because we cannot assume that truth is something more. And axiological, what I'm especially interested in, that values, transgressive values, are reduced only to the needs. But the problem is that needs are very particular, very instrumental, and very situational, contextual. And we cannot communicate with each other, persons from in other cultures, on the more abstract way because we perceive the reality only by our needs, our particular interests, and maybe willings. But it's very, very particular. And wisdom. Wisdom now is perceived only as a knowledge or set of information. That's why the great discussion about artificial intelligence, but only about intelligence. But intelligence is only a part of our personality, of our human reality. And what about emotions? What about spiritual reality? We talk only about intelligence. And a lot of threats and discussion and tensions connected to the discussion about artificial intelligence are connected only to the part of our reality, human reality. All those reductions have the influence for science and for social and human studies. Next presentation, if I can, please. The reason of theoretical reduction is just in understanding and recalling of the category of culture dignity. Our sciences and knowledge and our reflexivity about reality is also reduced. Psychology, modern psychology, especially scientific psychology, is a platform for great and many kind of reductions. For example, culture existence and human being reduced to singular individual behaviors. Behaviorism, an old approach to culture studies, is still alive. And if we look for the titles of many psychological books, we can see a lot of titles with behaviors, behaviors, and behaviors, behavioral attitudes, behavioral trends, and so on. Behaviorism is still alive with all those reductions. And the heritage of behaviorism is still alive, including the old schools like the American school, culture and personality approach, very old but still influential. And at the same time, functional anthropology that perceived and understand culture also as an element of social structure. Structural anthropology with very static understanding of human personality and human development. And what is very important for me, pansemiotic orientation that assumes that everything is only the system of meaning, not the system of values, but system of meaning. From this point of view, values are only a second category phenomena. But if we can see and understand just the value, we can talk also about so-called autotelic values. Autotelic values, and the next presentation, if you want, if I could say just, and next, because it's a little bit the same, autotelic values, just such like dignity, such values like honest, like freedom, like the truth. What characterize the autotelic values so important in our human reality, in our understanding of humanity at all? The next, please. Three features of autotelic values. The values for itself. Autotelic values are not functional according to different types of values. They exist for itself, just like dignity. Dignity is a value for itself. It's not instrumental, like in the second feature of this type of value, are not part of a long chain of instrumental values conducted in other purpose as a kind of in other values. Autotelic values are not instrument, not a means for conducting another type of values. And the last, maybe most important feature of those type of autotelic values, that autotelic values cannot be replaced by another type of values, absolutely unique in its functions, meaning like honor, freedom, love, responsibility. It's absolutely impossible to replace by another types of values. Absolutely unique. And just such categories like dignity, like human person, like freedom, like love, it's impossible to replace them by another types of values. And we should not and we can't reduce them to functional values, to functional behaviors, or to functional reasoning in obtaining particular social purposes, social tasks, which are absolutely instrumental, particular, and very often egoistic, and very often related to a lot of cultural wars, culture interests, and culture struggles. That's why the notion of dignity is a good example of the specific human values and humanity in human being. Because humanity means something more even than a man, and human because means some kind of qualities, which is real, also very difficult to precise definitions. But it's real in our perception, our understanding, without reductions, of course. In the next presentation, that's why we should not replace the notion of dignity with another very often used categories in language of sociological studies. For example, identification. Because identification means very particular, changeable, and instrumental reason, but also much more complex notion like even identity that is connected with specific situations and has also instrumental reasons. Political identity, professional identity, ethnical identity has also a lot of instrumental aspects. The dignity is absolutely free for such situational particular context and creates much more than we can describe in our precise scientific language, that it's reduced to very positivistic, parametrical, and measurable factors. And the next, that's why the notion of dignity is absolutely creative and absolutely worth for integral meaning because of the integral character of the notion. First of all, it combines ontological, axiological, and epistemological aspect of the humanities and culture studies. From this point of view, it enables us for the holistic analysis of culture and human being, because this notion provoke and stimulate us just to such unreductional holistic understanding of human reality. The next value of the notion is that it enables recalling and making use the old notions of human and social studies, like, for example, human person, or rights of nations based on the category of dignity. In social studies and sociological studies, where we have not only a human being, but also communities that has also their own dignity. For example, nations. The theory and concept of rights of nation is very, very old, from Middle Ages, developed, for example, in Jagiellonian University, even in 15th century. The category and theory and concept rights of nation based on the potential of a human being and dignity. The next value of the notion is that it enables to combine and recognize the question of cultural rights, not also national rights of nation, but also cultural rights, particular groups. Within human rights as a kind of human rights, in broad meaning of the notion, just on the base of axiological interpretation of the problem. And the next value and advantage of the notion is it generates humanistic approach to such question like culture security, culture participation, and many other modern problems in social human sciences, dignity of particular communities, not only the person, but also communities, big and small, big nations, but also small communities, local communities that also have their own dignity. And we cannot truly understand the challenges, the problems, the feelings, images, and hopes of those communities without such kind of notions. And that's kind of sensitivity and humanistic imagination. That's why the notion of dignity, like the notion of person, enables us to much more broad humanistic imagination, maybe research, and maybe understanding of the human and cultural reality. It's a great need for such a revitalization of this kind of imagination because of modern tendencies in humanities like posthumanism, transhumanism, that just reduces such kind of imagination, sensitivity, and even spiritual needs inside the culture, inside the human person. And what I would like to stress, propose, to just very simple step, revitalize very old categories, but very still fruitful, creative, and because of the time of different kinds of reductionism in human sciences, social sciences that are very real, very often met in our understanding of human reality, but also in our writings, in our lectures, in our approaches, in our scientific dialogue, in some scientific languages that we have today.
2 minutes.
Thank you. That's my hope and my proposals for revitalize such old categories that link personalism, philosophy of culture, and critical realism. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that. Any questions from online or on the floor? Deborah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I found it very interesting. I guess my only comment that I wanted to just bring out, I was a little bit I maybe surprised, I suppose, in some ways, and maybe I didn't understand correctly. I work in the field of social work and psychology, and so I guess when you spoke of psychological reductionism. And sort of what I understood is you suggested there's not enough focus on emotions or things like spirituality. And, in the field that I work, that would just not be the case. There's all kinds of talk about emotions, a big, big, big part of it. And certainly, spiritual meanings in that are very, very present. And so I guess I just wondered if whether to some degrees it's like silos, if these areas are sort of siloed, and so people are not speaking to each other. Anyway, that was the only comment I wanted to make. But I thank you very much because it was very intriguing.
Oh, we can talk about emotions also in a very different way, in very naturalistic. and in very spiritual way. Animals also have emotions, but those emotions are a little bit different than emotions experienced by human. But the question is, what is the difference? It's not the same, but do we know exactly what is the difference? I think we assume, but the problem in modern humanities is that we reduce the question and we try to study this in more precise scientific empirical way, but without fundamental philosophical questions that ask about the man and humanity, not in the category of what we are, but who we are. That's the question. It enables us to make a difference between animals and emotions in animals and emotions in humans. That's a way for critical dualism. I think that's why I love such critical dualism, because this kind of approach does not reduce this kind of questions and differences between what and who we are.
I see. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Questions or comments? Okay, well, that nicely brings us just up to before 5 p.m. In Poland. So thank you very much to all the speakers, and in particular, thank you very much to all the people who showed up to listen to us. So we really appreciate your time and your focus, and have a lovely evening.